Business news now, and inflation in the UK has hit a new 40-year high. Consumer prices rose by an annual rate of 10.1% last month, accelerating from 9.4% in June. That takes the UK to the top of the inflation league tables as the first advanced economy to suffer a double-digit increase. Despite the recent focus on energy, it was a sharp rise in food prices that accounted for the dramatic increase in living costs. Higher living costs in the developing world have prompted an about-face in Cuba as the government allows foreigners to support wholesale and retail trade. It's the first invitation to international investors since the 1959 Communist Revolution and comes as the island's centrally managed economy suffers one of its toughest periods in decades after the pandemic crippled the all-important tourism industry. Tough sanctions imposed by the Trump administration also damaged the economy, although US President Joe Biden loosened some of those restrictions earlier this year. Well, here to discuss those stories and the rest of the day's business news, including the latest controversial tweet from none other than Elon Musk, is our ICE correspondent, Laurie Laird. She joins me now from London. Good to see you, Laurie. Some astronomical inflation data out of the UK. What's behind the latest rise in prices?
Absolutely. As you said earlier, Charles, 10.1% double-digit annual rate of inflation. This is not something we're used to seeing in the developed world. We haven't seen it since the early 1980s. This is the sort of number we're used to seeing in the developing world, but this is where we are right now. It's curious because all that we have discussed lately is energy, petrol prices, heating gas. This has been the nature of economic news over the past couple of months. Energy prices were broadly neutral in the rise in CPI in the UK, didn't add to inflation, didn't subtract from inflation. Most of the rise was in food prices up by almost 12% year on year. And if you look at dairy products, eggs, milk, cheese, up almost 20% year on year. And the incredible thing about those dairy products are these are things that the UK imports. These are homegrown agricultural commodities, yet they're rising by 20% a year. Certainly things like feedstock have increased, that is important, but it's shocking to see how widespread inflation is. And it's not just energy imported inflation anymore, it's spreading to the entire economy.
So, I mean, what are the prime ministerial candidates saying about this, Laurie? Of course, one of them, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is British for Finance Minister.
Absolutely. Charles, they are saying as little as possible about this. And it's because an issue that we've spoken of before, such a small cohort of the electorate is actually voting for the prime ministerial candidate. It's just card-carrying Conservative Party members. They tend to be richer, whiter, more Southern-oriented than the rest of the population. These people are generally not being hit by the cost of living crisis as much as more vulnerable households are. So they're less concerned about it. So we're not hearing either of the candidates talk about this very much. Liz Truss, who seems to be the front runner, thinks that magically cutting corporate tax will help the cost of living crisis. This is what the party faithful want to hear, but it isn't going to do anything to help those people who are most affected by inflation.
And Laurie, from the point of view of the Bank of England, what's all this going to mean? Are we talking higher interest rates?
We're certainly talking higher interest rates, Charles. The question is for the next meeting for the Monetary Policy Committee, will it be a quarter point? Will it be half a point? Most economists say it will probably be half a point. I think they're probably right, but the Bank of England will also be looking at things like earnings growth, which is high at the moment. We discussed it yesterday, but it is coming down from some of the peaks we saw in the first quarter. So I suspect we might see half a percentage point from the Bank of England next time they meet, but then I think they'll go to smaller increments.
Well, let's switch gears, Laurie, and turn to Cuba, which is managing an inflation problem of its own. I mean, tell us about this loosening of foreign investment rules.
It's utterly remarkable, and Cuba inflation is running at about 70% per year. So I think that certainly puts the 10% we're seeing in the UK into perspective. And the problem in Cuba is that it's become very, very difficult to get hold of ordinary items, ordinary staples, food, medicine, very, very difficult to come by. And of course, when you have a scarcity of items, the price of those items rises. And so this is why the government has opened up the Cuban markets to foreign investors. It is such a symbolic and significant event for Cuba to say, wait a second, we need some help. We need some foreign cash in here so that people can get the goods that they need. What will happen is that foreign investors will be allowed to get into wholesale distribution, and they can fully own wholesale distributors. The rules on retail investment are a little bit less clear. It looks like that any kind of retail investment, or let me say investment in retail distributors, will have to be part of a joint venture process with Cuban oriented companies. So, and that part is a little bit unclear. It's a slight opening up, but it is extremely symbolic.
Well, we'll be watching that one to see if investors will be scrambling to get into the country. But let's move on to Elon Musk, who it has to be said, appears to be up to his old tricks. I mean, he's talking about, or rather joking about, buying Manchester United. Could he actually do it, though?
I suspect, I mean, he could do it. He could certainly raise the cash. It's a lot cheaper than buying Twitter, and he has raised some of the cash for that. But we're looking at his tweets that came out after the New York market closed, saying, I'm going to buy Manchester United. Thank you, or you're welcome, because Manchester United has had such a dire start to the English Premier League season. He then a couple of hours later said, just joking. Yes, he could raise the money to do it. Whether he could get the Glazer family, which owns the majority of Manchester United, to sell up is another question. Peculiarly, Charles, this is very interesting. A lot of reports came out in the UK media from mid-morning to late afternoon after the Musk story came out, saying that the Glazer family has been in talks since as early as May to sell a minority stake in the club. Now, why media outlets were sitting on this story until now is a bit of an open question. No confirmation from the Glazers on that, but it wouldn't be a massive surprise if they were looking to get some more investment in there, simply because Man United has had such a dire start to the season. They lost 4-0 last weekend to a club called Brentford. And Charles, I know you're not a huge EPL fan, but you've heard of Man United. Most people will say Brentford who?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, Laurie. Thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird talking to me there from London.